The translator bead was the size of a small grape, pale blue, implanted behind my left ear 3 days before the asterisk Kairos docked at Velshara station. The medic who inserted it had given me the standard briefing in the standard monotone. Calibration period of 72 hours. Minor errors possible during integration. Do not attempt high-stakes negotiation until the bead has fully mapped my vocal patterns and the target language's phonemic structure. I had nodded. I had signed the form. I had completely failed to account for what minor errors might look like when the target language was Velsharan, a tonal dialect spoken by a civilization that had been watching humanity fumble through space for approximately 4 decades, with the patient, bemused tolerance of people watching a child learn to walk. My name is Declan Marsh. I am 31 years old, a Xenorelations attaché for the Earth Diplomatic Corps, and I would like it on record somewhere, officially, that what happened on the morning of Day 4 was not my fault. The Velsharan Royal Court occupied the highest tier of the station, a vast circular chamber open on 3 sides to the star scatter of deep space, sealed only by atmospheric membrane, a shimmering curtain of contained air that let you stand near the edge and look directly into the void without a suit. The ceiling arched 3 stories above, carved from a single piece of pale violet mineral that the Velsharan called asterisk Vethka asterisk, which translated roughly as memory stone. It held the impressions of every queen who had ruled in the past 6 centuries, not portraits, but resonant imprints, something between a photograph and a fossil, the actual molecular record of their presence pressed into the stone during their coronation ceremony. I had read about it in the briefing packet. Standing beneath it was something else. The chamber smelled of something I had no name for, not flowers, not incense, something older and cleaner, like the air before rain on a world with violet skies. The light came from no obvious source. The floor was warm underfoot despite being polished stone. Ambassador Yeva Akafer walked 2 steps ahead of me, her posture immaculate, her silver diplomatic sash catching the ambient glow. Behind us came our small delegation, Torsten Hale, the trade specialist, Dr. Priya Mehta, our xenolinguist, and Sergeant Elan Voss, technically our security escort, though bringing visible security into a Velsharan royal audience was considered a mild insult that we'd elected to absorb because Voss refused to wait on the ship. We had been told the Queen would receive us briefly before the formal negotiations began, a courtesy greeting, standard protocol. The Queen would say a few words of welcome, we would say a few words of gratitude, refreshments would be offered, the tone would be set. I had been told, specifically, that my role in this portion of the morning was to stand slightly behind Ambassador Akafer and smile. The Queen entered from the far end of the chamber. I had seen images, of course. The briefing packet included a full biometric profile of Queen Velshara Sora IV, height, approximate age by human equivalents, they estimated 40, though Velsharan biology made this uncertain, coloring, the formal titles by which she must be addressed, and a note, written in the careful language of diplomatic documents, that she was considered by her people to be, and here the document had used the word transcendent asterisk. The word had not done any useful work preparing me for the actual woman. She was tall, nearly 7 feet by my estimate, though the Velsharan were built differently from humans, longer in the torso, with a slight forward lean to their spine that gave them a quality of perpetual readiness, like a question mark in motion. Her skin was the deep blue-gray of a storm at sea, iridescent in certain lights, so that as she moved I caught flickers of violet and silver within it. Her eyes were gold, not golden brown, not amber, but the pure struck metal gold of something that had been refined until nothing impure remained. Her hair was silver white and worn in an elaborate architectural arrangement, coiled and pinned with narrow spines of asterisk Vethka asterisk, small pieces of the memory stone, each one carrying the faintest ghost of a previous queen's imprint. She wore formal court robes of deep indigo, layered and structured, with a high collar that framed her face and fell in pleated lines to the floor. The robes were traditional, ceremonial, and I would later learn, specifically designed to conceal the physical form beneath them as an expression of sovereign dignity. For a Velsharan queen to appear in public in court robes was to appear as an office, not a body. The person inside was not on display. She stopped 12 feet from us and inclined her head, the precise degree of inclination that indicated she was greeting equals, not supplicants. Ambassador Akafer returned the gesture with practiced grace. Then the queen spoke. Her voice was low and formal, structured in the layered tonal pattern of High Velsharan, each syllable carrying two simultaneous registers, a surface meaning, and a contextual resonance. Dr. Maida had spent 6 months drilling me on the basics. I understood perhaps 40% of spoken High Velsharan at speed. The translator bead, which was 72 hours and approximately 40 minutes into its calibration window, took the Queen's words and rendered them in the clean, slightly flat English that translation technology always produced. We welcome the humans of the Kairos to the court of Velshara. May your words be true and your intentions clear. We offer greeting to your ambassador and to all those who stand with her. Standard, formal, exactly what the briefing packet had predicted. Ambassador Akafer responded with equal formality, and I stood slightly behind her left shoulder and kept my expression pleasant and attentive, exactly as briefed. Then the Queen looked at me. Not at the delegation, at me specifically. A direct, assessing gaze that lasted perhaps 3 seconds, the gold of her eyes moving over my face, with the calm attention of someone reading a text they had encountered before in a different language. Later, Dr. Maida would tell me that Queen Sara was known for this, that she had a habit of looking at each member of a delegation individually before the formal proceedings, a personal practice she had maintained since her coronation. She was reportedly quite good at reading people. She said something. The translator bead rendered it. I heard in clean and unambiguous English, "You are the young one. You have a direct quality I find uncommon in diplomatic delegations." What I said in response, what I intended to say, was a Velsharan phrase from the briefing packet, a polite formal expression of gratitude for being acknowledged by one of such distinction. The phrase was Velsha Oreth Venkasu, roughly, "Your radiance honors those who stand in it." The translator bead, which was 72 hours and 40 minutes into its calibration window, and had not yet fully mapped the distinction between the Velsharan phonemes *Venka and *Vethka*, rendered what I actually said. I said with perfect pronunciation and complete sincerity, "Your breasts are beautiful beyond description, great queen." The silence that followed was the specific, crystalline silence of a very large room in which every living thing has simultaneously stopped breathing. I saw Ambassador Akafer's shoulders go rigid. I saw Dr. Maida's hand come up to cover her mouth. I saw Sergeant Voss look at the ceiling, with the focused calm of someone who has decided that nothing they are currently witnessing is their problem. The Queen looked at me. I looked back at her, still smiling, because my brain had not yet processed what had come out of my mouth, because the translator bead translated outgoing speech into Velsharan for me, and I had no way of hearing the result, because I was still under the impression that I had said something gracious and appropriate. Then Dr. Maida made a very small, very strangled sound, and I understood that something had gone wrong. The Queen's expression did not change. This, I would later learn, was significant. A Velsharan ruler confronted with a social rupture of any magnitude was trained from childhood to maintain the mask of composed authority. The face you showed your court was the face of the office. What happened beneath it was a private matter. What I saw was stillness. Gold eyes, absolutely level. A quality of attention that felt like being looked at by something very old and very certain of itself. Then she said something. The translator bead, which had just received what appeared to be an urgent correction signal from Dr. Maida's independent translation device, rendered the Queen's words in English with a half-second delay that felt like a year. Then by the ancient compact of Velshara, in the presence of this court and these witnesses, I accept your suit. I said I'm sorry. Not in Velsharan, in English, plainly, with absolutely no diplomatic grace whatsoever. The court, perhaps 60 Velsharan officials, advisors and attendants arranged around the perimeter of the chamber, did not react visibly. They were as well trained as their queen. But I had the distinct sense that the quality of their attention had shifted, the way a crowd shifts when something unexpected has entered the event. Ambassador Akaffer turned to look at me. Her expression was that of a woman who has dedicated 30 years of her life to the smooth conduct of interspecies relations and is currently watching 30 years of careful work approach a cliff at speed. Dr. Maida stepped close to my ear and said, very quietly and very quickly, the phrase you used *Vethka versus *Venka, the translator bead swapped them. Venka is radiance. Vethka it's a word that refers to a specific part of the female form, and also, simultaneously, in formal High Velsharan, it is the traditional opening phrase of a marriage proposal. The ancient compact states that if a man speaks the proposal words to a sitting queen in open court, and she acknowledges them, both parties are bound to a formal courtship evaluation. She has just acknowledged them, Declan. I stood there for a moment. How do I unacknowledge them? I said. You can't, Dr. Maida said. That's what ancient compact * means. The formal negotiations were postponed. This was communicated to our delegation with exquisite Velsharan courtesy, an official note delivered by a minor court functionary, explaining that the Queen's schedule required adjustment and that the diplomatic sessions would resume the following morning. No mention was made of the reason. The court functionary's face was entirely neutral. His eyes, when they passed over me, were the eyes of a man watching a particularly fascinating disaster unfold from a safe distance. We were escorted to the diplomatic quarters, a suite of rooms in the station's mid-tier, comfortable and thoughtfully appointed, with a window that looked out on a sweep of stars and a small enclosed garden where things that might have been flowers bloomed in colors I had no names for. Ambassador Akaffer closed the door behind the escorting official. Then she sat down on a low bench, folded her hands in her lap, and looked at the ceiling for approximately 45 seconds. Declan, she said finally. I know, I said. Walk me through it. I walked her through it, the translator bead, the calibration window. The phrase from the briefing packet that I had attempted to deploy, the bead's failure to distinguish between *Venka and *Vethka*. The result. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for another long moment. The ancient compact, she said. Do we know the terms? Dr. Maida had spent the past hour with her translation materials spread across the table. I do now, she said, and she did not sound pleased about what she had found. The compact dates to approximately 800 years ago. It was established to formalize courtship proceedings for Velsharan queens, who historically had a problem with politically motivated suits from powerful houses. The compact created a structured evaluation process. A courtship period of 30 days, during which the suitor lives in the court, is evaluated against the Queen's criteria, and at the end either formally withdraws or the Queen makes a decision. The binding element is that once the Queen acknowledges the suit in open court, she is obligated to conduct the evaluation. She cannot simply dismiss the suitor. He has to go through the process. And the suitor, Akaffer said, also bound to remain for the 30 days unless he formally withdraws, Formal withdrawal is permitted, but Maida paused. It carries significant social weight. A man who withdraws from the compact is considered to have insulted the Queen's judgment. It would essentially end any diplomatic relationship between us and Velshara for the foreseeable future. The room was quiet. What does the evaluation process involve? I said. It varies by queen, Maida said. The compact specifies minimum requirements: attendance at court, participation in certain formal events, demonstrated competency in areas the queen considers significant. But each queen sets her own criteria beyond the baseline. She looked up from her materials. We don't know Queen Sara's criteria yet. We'll find out, HFY said. She looked at me with the expression of a person making a very difficult calculation. Declan, I need you to understand what I'm about to ask you. I already understand it, I said. Do you? You're going to ask me to stay, I said. For the 30 days. To not withdraw. Because if I withdraw, it ends any chance of a working relationship with Velshara, and the *Kairos* mission has been 5 years in planning, and Velshara is the linchpin of the entire Outer Ring diplomatic cluster, and the withdrawal of Velsharan cooperation would essentially collapse the framework we've been building since 2031. HFY was quiet. I made a mistake, I said. The bead malfunctioned, but the result is mine to deal with. I'll stay. The court functionary returned the next morning. His name was Rilshat Toven, and he was, I gathered, a senior member of the Queen's household staff, roughly equivalent to a chief of staff, though the Velsharan equivalent carried more ceremonial weight. He was shorter than most Velsharan I'd encountered, which still put him at about 6'2", with deep gray skin and eyes the color of copper. He wore a smaller version of the court's formal attire and looked at me with the polite, carefully managed expression of a man who has been asked to explain a complicated situation to someone who probably cannot fully appreciate it. He explained the compact's basic requirements. I would take up residence in the court quarters, separate from the diplomatic suite. I would attend morning council as an observer. I would take meals in the court dining hall. I would participate in whatever evaluative activities the Queen's office designated. What activities? I said. The Queen will communicate her criteria in her own time, Rilshat Toven said. It is not customary for the suitor to inquire directly. Right, I said. And is there anything I should specifically not do? He considered this. Many things, he said pleasantly. I will have a document prepared. The document was 14 pages long. I read it twice. Some items were predictable: formal address protocols, prohibited topics of conversation, rules regarding eye contact during court sessions. Some were less predictable. There was an entire section on the handling of *Vethka. The memory stone, which I was not to touch, referenced directly in conversation, or look at for more than a few seconds at a time unless invited to do so by the Queen personally, as the stone was considered an extension of her sovereign body and the bodies of her predecessors. This felt relevant given that I had already, accidentally, made a comment about her sovereign body in open court in front of 60 people. There was a section on dietary protocols, a section on sleep schedules and the significance of the court's particular patterns of light and darkness to Velsharan circadian rhythms, and a long section on conversation that boiled down to: be honest, be direct, do not perform, and understand that the Velsharan consider elaborate social performance a form of lying. That last point I found interesting. I saw the Queen for the first time in 3 days during the morning council on day 4 of my residence. The council chamber was smaller than the throne room, a circular table of pale stone, perhaps 20 feet across, with the Queen at its head and her senior advisors arranged around it. I was seated at a small secondary table to the left, clearly positioned as an observer rather than a participant. Rilshat sat beside me and murmured quiet explanations when the proceedings required context. She looked exactly as I remembered. Composed, precise, wearing a slightly less elaborate version of the court robes, the silver-white hair pinned without the *Vethka* spines today. Those, Tovin explained, were for formal audiences only. Without them she looked marginally like a person as well as an office. The council discussed something I followed only partially, a trade dispute with a neighboring station cluster, something about water processing rights, and a contract that had 3 interpretations depending on which archival text you consulted. She listened more than she spoke. When she spoke, it was in short, precisely formed sentences, and the advisors wrote down what she said before responding. Not because they were taking notes, Tovin told me, because they considered her words worth recording before they replied. She didn't look at me during the council. Afterward, as the advisors filed out, she did. A brief, direct look. The gold eyes moving across my face without warmth or hostility, more like assessment, the look of someone taking an accurate measurement. Then she left, and I sat with Tovin in the emptied chamber and thought about the next 26 days. The first formal evaluation activity came on day 6. Tovin appeared at my quarters that morning with a calm expression and a short explanation. The Queen wished me to accompany her to the Velka Reach, the outer agricultural tier of the station, where a dispute between 2 farming collectives required royal mediation. She wants me to watch her mediate a dispute, I said. She wants to observe how you conduct yourself outside formal settings, Tovin said, whether you are consistent. I thought about the section of the document on performance as a form of lying. She thinks diplomats perform their character, I said. The Queen has met many diplomats, Tovin said. We traveled by enclosed tram to the station's agricultural level, a vast terrace space under artificial sunlight, growing things in long rows that smelled of soil and growing things in a way that made my chest ache briefly with something like homesickness. The Queen arrived with a small retinue, wearing simpler clothing than I had seen her in before, still formal, still structured, but less ceremonial, the kind of practical formality of someone who intends to actually work. The dispute involved 2 families and an irrigation channel. It was, at bottom, a completely ordinary argument about water and land and ancient agreements that both parties interpreted differently. The Queen listened to both sides with the same quality of attention she had brought to the Trade Council, present, specific, unhurried. She asked questions that were not rhetorical. She did not pretend she had answers before she had heard everything. At one point she asked me something. I had been standing 2 steps behind her retinue, doing my best impression of furniture, and the question caught me off balance. The human, she said, still the translator beads clean English in my ear, worked in what capacity before diplomatic service? The question was directed at the general space around her, but everyone looked at me. Water management, I said. Before the Corps, I worked infrastructure planning for the Auckland Municipal Water Authority for 4 years. The gold eyes moved to me. Explain what you observe about this dispute, she said. I looked at the irrigation channel. I looked at the land maps both families had brought. I walked to the channel itself and looked at the junction point that was the center of the argument, and then I came back. They're both right, I said. The original agreement assigned primary draw rights to the Eastern Collective during the first half of the growth cycle and secondary rights in the second half. What neither of them accounted for is that the channel's flow rate has increased by roughly 1/3 since the original agreement was drafted, probably because of the expansion work done on the station's water recirculation system about 15 years ago. They're arguing about percentage of a fixed resource, but the resource isn't fixed anymore. There's more water than the agreement assumed. They don't need to divide it the same way. They need a new agreement that reflects the current flow rate and gives both collectives workable primary windows. The Queen looked at me for a moment. Then she looked at her senior advisor and said something in high Velsharan that the bead, now 6 days further into calibration, rendered as, have the current flow rate measured and documented. Draw up a revised agreement framework. She looked back at me. You did not recommend a solution, she said. You identified why the existing framework was insufficient. The solution is theirs to agree to, I said. I don't know their planting schedules or their labor situations or what they've promised their families. I know the structural problem. They know what they need from the answer. She watched me for a moment longer. Then she turned and walked to speak with the families, and I went back to standing near the retinue, and Tovin appeared at my elbow. That, he said quietly, was better than expected. She kept walking, and I fell into step 2 paces behind, and I was still thinking about what she had said, better than expected, when Tovin appeared at my other side. You realize, he said quietly, that in 40 years of royal audiences, no suitor has ever been asked to contribute to a dispute resolution on the first evaluative outing. Is that good? I said. It is notable, he said, which was not quite the same thing, but the way he said it suggested it was probably closer to good than bad. Day 8 brought what Tovin called a *Velka sitting, a court session in which the Queen heard petitions from citizens of the station's lower tiers. It was not ceremonial. It was not political in the grand sense. It was simply governance, the basic, unglamorous work of a sovereign who still believed in the direct line between ruler and ruled. I sat at my observer's table and watched her for 4 hours. The petitions ranged from disputes about housing allocation to concerns about the quality of recycled air on the lower levels, to a complicated multi-party grievance involving the licensing of a particular type of musical performance that was apparently sacred to one community and considered disruptive by 2 others. She gave each petitioner the same quality of attention. She did not hurry them. She did not visibly categorize them by significance before they finished speaking. What struck me was that she remembered names. Not just the names on the petition documents. She remembered petitioners from previous sessions. A woman who had come 18 months ago about a water pressure issue would reference that previous visit, and Sara would know what the woman was referring to before the context was fully explained. Tovin confirmed it when I asked. The Queen reviewed petition records before every sitting, but she also simply retained them. 4 sessions a year for 12 years of her reign, and she still held the threads. Does she always do that? I said. Remember everyone. She says it is the least she can do, Tovin said. That if a person has taken the time to come before the court should do them the courtesy of knowing who they are. I sat with that for a while. On the way back to my quarters, I passed through a corridor I hadn't taken before, one of the mid-tier service passages, and encountered a maintenance worker struggling with a jammed panel on a climate control unit. I stopped. I had no particular expertise with Velsharan climate systems, but the panel mechanism looked structurally similar to HVAC units I had worked around in municipal buildings. We spent 20 minutes on it together, communicating in my broken Velsharan and her broken English and a great deal of pointing, and we got the panel open. She thanked me in a rapid burst of language I only partially followed, including a phrase that the bead rendered as "you are not useless," which I chose to accept as a compliment. I did not know until 3 days later, when Tovin mentioned it with his particular brand of carefully neutral expression, that the maintenance worker had mentioned the incident to her supervisor, who had mentioned it to the household staff, who had passed it along through channels that eventually reached the Queen. She asks, Tovin said, whether you always assist with maintenance work. When I can, I said, is that a problem? No, he said. She wishes me to inform you that it is the kind of thing she considers worth knowing. Day 12. We spoke after the morning council, the longest exchange we had managed in the first 2 weeks, almost 20 minutes, standing in the corridor outside the council chamber while the advisors dispersed around us. She asked about Earth. Not the political Earth of briefing documents, not the Earth of the core diplomatic positioning. She asked about what it was like to grow up on a planet, a surface, open sky. I told her about Auckland, the harbor, the way the light came off the water in the late afternoon, the hills you could see the city from if you knew where to climb, the smell of rain on warm pavement, something I had tried to explain to Dr. Mehta once as a shorthand for home, and she had understood it because she was from Mumbai and had her own version. "We have not had a planetary surface in 400 years, Sora said. "My people know it only from the ancestral records." "Do you miss it?" I said. "Something you've never had." "The records are very complete," she said. "Sometimes I think I carry a memory of standing on ground that goes down for kilometers beneath my feet, and then I walk across the station floor, and the ground goes down for perhaps 2 meters of plating, and below that is vacuum." A pause. "It produces a particular feeling." "Vertiginous," I said. "Yes," she looked at me. "Do you have that feeling here, the reverse of it, knowing the ground is all there is for a very long way?" I thought about the atmospheric membrane at the edge of the throne room, the stars on the other side. "Sometimes," I said. "Mostly I've been too occupied to feel it." "What occupies you?" "Trying to understand this place," I said. "Trying not to make mistakes I've already made, watching how you run a court." A brief pause. "And what have you observed?" she said. "That you govern like someone who knows the names," I said. "That you actually believe the petition process matters. That your advisors write down what you say not to be sycophantic, but because you tend to be specific and specific things are worth recording." I paused. "And that the weight of it is real. You don't perform lightness when it's heavy." She looked at me for a long moment. "That is an accurate observation," she said. "Most observers take longer to see it or do not see it at all." "I've been watching carefully," I said. "I know," she said. "I watch you watching." Then she inclined her head briefly and walked down the corridor, and I stood there for a moment longer than was probably graceful. Days accumulated. I found my way into the patterns of the court, the rhythms of the morning council, the particular quality of the communal meals, the way the station's artificial light shifted through the day in colors the Velsharan had calibrated to match some ancestral sun that had been left behind centuries ago when they became a spacefaring people. I made mistakes, several and of varying severity. On day 9, I addressed a senior court official by a Title I rank below his actual station, which was the equivalent of calling a general a corporal. On day 11, I accepted a food offering with my left hand, which was the hand traditionally used for transactions involving debt repayment, and the official who had offered the food had to be quietly reassured by a colleague that I had not just implied she owed me something. On day 14, I laughed at something Tovin said during what turned out to be a moment of formal silence designated by the court schedule, and the sound of my laugh in that silence was approximately as welcome as an alarm. Each time I apologized, directly and without elaboration. I had read the document. I knew the Velsharan position on performance. Elaborate apologies were a form of performance. A short, direct acknowledgement and a visible effort not to repeat the error was what the culture recognized as genuine. I did not repeat the error about the official's title. I did not repeat the left-hand mistake. I did, I am sorry to say, laugh at an inappropriate moment one more time on day 20, but it was a different kind of silence, and I had misread the schedule, and Tovin's expression when it happened was so specifically resigned that I nearly laughed again. On day 16, there was a formal court dinner for the visiting delegation from a neighboring station cluster, a political visit entirely separate from our own diplomatic mission, which had been quietly suspended during the compact period, while Ambassador Akaffer managed the paperwork from the diplomatic suite and sent me occasional messages that consisted mostly of "How is it going?" and please don't cause a second incident. I was seated at the lower tier of the dining arrangement. Court protocol placed the compact suitor below the visiting dignitaries, above the household staff, in a position that made me visible without being prominent. I understood this as designed. She was watching how I managed being neither important nor invisible. The visiting delegation was a curious mix. Their head of state was an older man with the careful energy of someone who has survived a great deal of political volatility and become very good at being unreadable. His junior advisors were nervous in the way of people who had prepared extensively and were discovering that the actual event was different from the preparation. I found myself talking during the mid-dinner social period to one of those junior advisors, a young woman named Selka Rien, who was perhaps 23, and had been stationed next to me because the seating arrangement had a gap and she fit it. She was bright and anxious and trying very hard to seem as though she wasn't anxious, and I recognized it because I had been 23 once and anxious fairly often. We talked about the agricultural tier. I told her about the irrigation dispute. She asked careful, intelligent questions. By the end of the dinner, she had relaxed enough to ask me directly how a human had ended up as a compact suitor in a Velscherin court, and I told her the honest version, the translator bead, the calibration window, the specific phonemic confusion, and she laughed, a short surprised sound that she immediately tried to contain. "I'm sorry," she said, "that is completely ridiculous," I said. "You can say it. I've been saying it to myself for 2 weeks. She smiled. Does she know it was an accident?" "Completely," I said. "She knew in the moment, the whole court knew. And she still honored the compact." "She was curious," I said. Which was what Sara had told me, and I had found it in the days since to be the truest and most characteristic thing about her. That she was deeply, genuinely curious, not in the acquisitive way of people who collect information, but in the way of someone who finds the world fundamentally interesting and wants to understand it accurately. Selka Rien looked at me with the frank assessment of someone very young, who has not yet learned to be indirect about what she is seeing. "You don't seem like someone who stumbled into this," she said. "You seem like someone who belongs here." I looked down the length of the table to where the Queen sat at its head, in conversation with the visiting head of state, present and specific and carrying everything she carried with the same quality she brought to everything else. "I'm working on it," I said. Day 19. Tovin brought me a message, not formal, not from the Queen's office, but from Sara directly in her own hand, written in careful English that was more formal than her spoken register, but carried the same quality of precision. "Tomorrow we will observe the closing of the memorial season. It is a private court observance. You are invited if you wish to attend. It is not an evaluative activity. It is simply something I think you should see if you are to understand this place." I wrote back, "I will be there." The memorial season, Tovin explained that evening, was the annual period during which the Velscherin marked the deaths of those lost in the Great Dispersal, the migration from their original world 4 centuries ago that had cost, by their records, somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of their total population, not to violence, to the ordinary catastrophe of a people pulling up their roots from the only ground they had ever known and trying to replant themselves in the cold of space, in stations and ships, without enough of anything except each other. The closing ceremony was held in the throne room at dawn by the station's clock, with the membrane pulled back from one of the open edges so that the stars were directly present. There were perhaps 30 people, not the full court, but a specific gathering, the Queen and her closest household and advisors, the people she trusted with the unarmored version of her office. There was no performance, no speeches. The Queen stood near the open edge with the stars at her back and the memory stone above, and she read, quietly, from a list of names. Not all the names, there were too many. A selection, rotated each year so that over the decades every name had been spoken in that room. She read each one with the same quality she brought to petitions, as if the person the name belonged to was still present enough to deserve being heard properly. Afterward, in the quiet that followed, I found myself standing beside her at the open edge, looking out. 400 years, I said eventually. Yes. And you still read the names. Someone has to, she said. Someone should want to, she paused. On Earth, do humans mark their migrations? I thought about it. The genuine ones, not the ceremonial versions. Some do, I said. The ones who understand that arriving somewhere doesn't mean forgetting what it costs to leave. She looked at me. Yes, she said, exactly that. We stood in silence for a while. The stars were very bright and very still. The Queen and I spoke, gradually more. Never at length. Short exchanges, often in the context of whatever evaluative activity she had designated, and the activities ranged widely, in a way I eventually understood was intentional. She watched me deal with problems that had clear technical solutions and problems that had no solution at all. She watched me sit with advisors who disagreed with each other and with me. She watched me navigate a formal dinner where I was seated next to a court official who had, for reasons Tovin declined to specify, taken a pronounced dislike to my presence, and expressed this through a series of technically polite but structurally hostile conversational maneuvers. You did not respond to Velka Aaron's provocations, she said the next morning, in the brief window after council when she sometimes spoke with me. He wasn't trying to start an argument, I said. He was trying to make me feel unwelcome. Arguing with him would have confirmed that it was working. What were you doing instead? Listening to what he actually said underneath the provocation, I said. He's worried about the water recirculation project. He has facilities on the level below the proposed expansion zone. He thinks no one in the court is taking his concerns seriously. A pause. And are they? She said. I don't know, I said. Are they? She looked at me with the level gold attention that I had stopped finding intimidating somewhere around day 10 and had started finding something else, something I was being careful not to name. I will find out, she said. Day 23. I was in the small garden attached to the court quarters, the one with the unnameable flowers, at an hour when the station's light had shifted to deep amber, mimicking whatever the Velsharan ancestral sun had looked like at dusk. I was writing in the personal log I had been keeping since day one, the log that was mine and not diplomatic record, the one where I said things more honestly than any official document would permit. I was writing about her. Not the Queen, Sora. I had started thinking of her as Sora somewhere around day 15, entirely internally, while being extremely careful to address her correctly in all actual interactions. I was writing about the way she listened. I had been around powerful people my entire career, ambassadors, ministers, officials of various titles and civilizations, and most of them listened in a particular way, the way of people who are already formulating their response while you are still speaking. She listened the way I imagined very old trees would listen if trees could listen, with the full weight of everything she was, patient and deep and genuinely interested in what she would find at the end of your sentence. I was writing about the fact that she had laughed, once on day 18. We had been walking through a corridor of the station's archive level, and Tovin had said something I had not fully caught, and she had laughed low, brief, contained, but genuine, a real sound from a real person inside the ceremonial office, and I had turned to look at her before I could stop myself, and she had caught me looking, and for a moment her expression had been simply human, not Velsharan, not queenly. Human, in the way I had started to think transcended species, the particular expression of someone who has been seen doing something real and is considering whether to hide it. She had not hidden it. She had held my gaze for a moment, and then looked ahead again and kept walking. I was writing that I was in trouble. I was not writing it in those exact words, but I was writing it because the document had told me the Velsharen considered self-deception a form of lying, and I was trying to extend that principle to myself. I was in trouble because I was 30 days into a process I had entered as a diplomatic obligation, and I had stopped thinking of it as a diplomatic obligation approximately 12 days ago. You are not writing the log that the Corps requires. I looked up. She was standing at the garden entrance, not in court robes, in the simpler clothing I had seen her wear for working sessions, the structured practical formality that meant she was a person rather than an office. Which meant she was here in a personal capacity, not a formal one, which meant I did not have a word for what this was. No, I said, this is the other one. May I sit? I moved to make room on the bench. She sat, not close but not far, and looked at the flowers for a moment. 7 days remain, she said. I know. You understand the compact's ending provisions. At the end of 30 days, I said, either I formally withdraw or you make a decision. If you decide against accepting the suit, both parties are released with honor. If you decide in favor, a formal betrothal period begins. Yes, she paused. You have not withdrawn. No. You could have, she said. The compact permits it. The diplomatic repercussions, while significant, could have been managed. Ambassador Akefer is skilled. I know, I said. Why did you not? The honest answer was complicated. The honest answer had started as one thing and become another, somewhere in the middle of 30 days, and I was not sure I could explain the full arc of that in terms that would translate cleanly. But she had told me, on day 12, in one of our brief exchanges, that she valued the attempt at honesty over the achievement of clarity. That trying to say a true thing imperfectly was worth more to her than saying a polished thing perfectly. When I agreed to stay, I said, it was because I'd made a mistake and I felt responsible for fixing it, and withdrawing would have broken something that a lot of people had worked toward for a long time. That's the answer that was true on day 1. And now, I looked at the flowers. Now the answer is different, I said. I don't want to withdraw, that's the simpler version. She was quiet. I know that complicates things, I said. I'm a human. You're the queen of Velshara. The compact exists for Velsharan suitors, not for humans who stumbled into it through a malfunctioning translator bead. I understand that whatever I feel about the last 23 days, the decision is yours and the considerations you're working with are considerably larger than what I want. Yes, she said, they are. I'm not asking you to ignore that, I said. I'm just telling you the honest answer to why I didn't withdraw. She looked at me. The gold eyes, the level attention, the quality of being fully seen that I had never quite gotten used to. Do you know, she said, what my advisors said when I told them I intended to honor the compact? I can imagine the range, I said. The consensus was that I had been placed in an impossible position by an accident, and that the most graceful resolution would be to allow a quiet withdrawal in the first week, citing procedural grounds, and to resume diplomatic proceedings as though the incident had not occurred. That sounds like the sensible approach, I said. It is, she said. I have been told many times in my life what the sensible approach is. A pause. Why didn't you take it? I said. She looked at the flowers for a moment. Because I looked at you, she said, in the moment after you spoke those words in open court, and your face, you did not know what you had said. That was clear. But underneath that, before the confusion, for the half-second when you thought you had said something gracious, there was something genuine in your expression, a real wish to honor the person you were speaking to. The words were wrong. The impulse behind them was not. I sat with that. And I was curious, she said, and there was something in her voice that I had not heard there before, something lighter, not quite dry humor, not quite warmth, something in between. I have received many formal suits from houses with long names and longer records of political calculation. I had never received one from a human with a malfunctioning translation device and an honest face. I'm not sure that's a qualification, I said. It is not a *dis* qualification, she said, which is more than I can say for most of them. Day 25. I sent Ambassador HFY a message. It was not the message I had been rehearsing in various forms since day 15, when I had first acknowledged to myself that the diplomatic calculus was no longer the primary reason I was staying. It was not the message I had drafted and deleted on day 20, which had been too analytical. It was not the message from day 22, which had been too apologetic. It was short. It said, I need you to know that what I'm going to tell you at the end of this isn't purely diplomatic. I thought you should have time to prepare for that. She replied within the hour, Declan, I have been a diplomat for 30 years. I know what a person looks like when they're no longer calculating. I have known since day 12. Prepare your own paperwork. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I went to find Tovin and asked him something I had been trying to figure out how to ask for the better part of a week. If the compact results in a betrothal, I said, what do I actually do? I mean structurally. What is the role? What would I be? Tovin's expression moved through several registers before settling on the patient look of someone who has agreed to help navigate unprecedented territory. The compact does not specify clearly for a non-Velsharan suitor, he said. It would require interpretation and ultimately a royal determination. But the traditional role of a queen's consort on Velshara is not ceremonial in the way it may be in some human histories. He paused. A consort in the Velsharan tradition is a counselor, a second perspective, someone who stands beside the queen in the governance work, not above it, not below it, but alongside. The arrangement assumes that the person chosen has judgment worth consulting. Because she's running a civilization, I said. Yes. And she'd be choosing someone to help her think through that. That is one way to describe it, Tovin said. The historical precedent suggests that the strongest Velsharan queens were those whose consorts were willing to disagree with them when they were wrong. I sat with that. Tovin, I said, has she done this evaluation before for any other suit? He was quiet for a moment. The queen has been on the throne for 12 years, he said. There have been 3 formal suits under the compact in that period. She evaluated each one. And the first suitor withdrew on day 12, citing personal reasons that the court accepted without question. He paused. The second was evaluated to full term and the queen declined, citing incompatibility of fundamental values. The third was evaluated to full term, and the queen declined on grounds she did not publicly specify. She declined all 3, I said. Yes. I thought about the document, the section on performance as lying, the section on directness, 12 years of a queen running a court and a civilization with no one beside her, declining 3 suits across that time because none of them had given her what she was actually looking for. What was wrong with them, I said, if you know? Tovin considered this for a long moment. I know the queen's assessments, he said carefully, because it is my role to know them. The first suitor was skilled and accomplished and presented himself impeccably. He withdrew, I believe, because he realized that what he had presented was a performance and that she could see through it, and that he did not wish to be seen through. He paused. The second suitor was genuinely who he presented himself to be, but what he genuinely was did not match what this life requires. He was a good man in the wrong position. The queen recognized it before he did and made the kindest decision available to her. Another pause. The third was capable and honest. But he wanted to change things, not to understand them first. He had decided what Velshara needed before he had spent enough time here to earn the right to that opinion. I sat with all 3 of those. And me, I said. Tovin looked at me with the copper eyes and the expression of a man who has adapted to the improbable and found it, on balance, acceptable. You, he said, have not withdrawn, you have not performed, you have not decided what you know before you have listened, and you came here by accident, which means everything you have done since has been by choice. He stood. I am not in the business of predicting the Queen's determinations, but I can tell you that in 12 years of service in this household, I have not seen her laugh in a corridor with a visitor before. He paused at the door. That is all I will say. Day 28. Tovin came to my quarters with a formal notice from the Queen's office. It contained an invitation. Not an evaluative activity. An invitation, specifically personal, to the private viewing chamber adjacent to the throne room, where the full expanse of the *Vethka* ceiling could be observed from below through a glass floor. The architectural heart of the station, the room where the queens of Velshara came, privately, to feel the weight of what they carried. No one outside the royal household had been invited into that room in 40 years. I went. She was standing at the center of the glass floor when I arrived, looking up through it at the ceiling of memory stone above. Without the formal retinue, without Tovin, without the structure of court around her, she was simply a woman standing in a room that held 800 years of her predecessors. I stood beside her and looked up. The stone was extraordinary up close. Not just the surface impressions I had seen from below, up through the glass. With the light hitting it at this angle, you could see the depth of each imprint. The way the Queen's presences had been recorded not just as surface marks, but as structural changes in the crystal itself. Each one a different density and color, layered over centuries into something that was simultaneously history and geology and portrait. My mother is there, Sora said. She indicated a section of the ceiling without pointing directly, a slight tilt of her chin. And her mother, and 7 generations before them. What does it feel like, I said, to be under it? She thought about this. Heavy, she said, on the days when decisions are difficult. On other days it feels like company. I looked up at the 800 years above us. What kind of day is today? I said. Uncertain, she said, which is not the same as difficult. We stood in quiet for a while. The kind of quiet I had come to recognize in 28 days, the Velsharan concept of *Velran*, the productive silence, the kind where something is growing rather than merely waiting. 2 days remain, she said. Yes. I have spent 28 days evaluating whether you are a person I could trust beside me, she said. Whether you are someone whose judgment I would want access to. Whether you could bear what this life requires, the weight, the visibility, the constraints, the scope of what the decisions here mean for people who will never know your name. And I said, the water dispute, she said. Velka Aaron's concerns about the recirculation project, I looked into them as I told you I would. He was right. The expansion plans had not adequately accounted for the impact on his tier. The plans have been revised. Good, I said. That was your observation, she said. You had no reason to pass it to me. It had nothing to do with your evaluation, your position here, or any outcome that would benefit you. You simply noticed a person being ignored who should not have been, and you said so. I looked at her. He was annoying, I said. But he wasn't wrong. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, something more contained, more private. No, she said, he was not. She turned to look at me directly. I need to tell you something honestly, she said. Please, I said. The compact was written for Velsharan suitors, she said. A human consort has no precedent in our history. There are advisors who will object. There are political considerations that are genuinely complex. The life I could offer you would require you to leave your world, your career, your core, everything you know, and live here in this court with all the constraints and visibility and weight that I just described. I am not a simple person. I carry 800 years of women above me, and an entire civilization's expectations around me, and I will not always be easy to be near. I know, I said. I want you to know it before I tell you what I have decided, she said, not as a warning meant to discourage you, as a true description of what you would be choosing. I understand, I said. The gold eyes, level and clear and entirely honest. I have decided, she said, that the accidental words you spoke 28 days ago were perhaps the most interesting thing anyone has said to me in a very long time, and that the 28 days since have confirmed that the person behind those words is someone I wish to keep near me, if you still want this. The room was quiet. 800 years of queens looked down through the glass. I still want this, I said. The formal betrothal announcement was made on day 30, in the throne room, before the full court. It was the most elaborate ceremonial event I had attended since my arrival, and I had attended several elaborate ceremonial events in 30 days. There were readings from the compact. There were formal acknowledgments from the senior advisors, some warmer than others, but all conducted with the full weight of Velsharan court protocol, which meant that whatever reservations anyone had, they were expressed in the appropriate registers at the appropriate times, and not in the middle of an announcement ceremony. Rilshat Toven stood beside me through it all, murmuring quiet guidance, his copper eyes carrying the expression of a man who has adapted to the improbable. Ambassador Akaffer was present as the Earth diplomatic observer. She had aged, I thought, approximately 3 years in the past 30 days. When the ceremony concluded and the court filed out, she crossed the floor to where I stood and looked at me for a long moment. Well, she said. I know, I said. The paperwork for this, she said, is going to be extraordinary. I'll help, I said. You had better, she said. And then, quietly, she squeezed my arm once and let go, and went to speak with Toven about the diplomatic implications. Sora found me that evening in the small garden. I was sitting with my log, not writing, just holding it, looking at the unnameable flowers in the amber light. She sat beside me, closer than she had on day 23, close enough that the layered fabric of her clothing brushed against my sleeve. You are thinking, she said. I'm always thinking, I said. I'm a diplomat, it's the one thing we reliably do. What are you thinking about? I considered this. I'm thinking about the fact that 2 months ago I was in Auckland doing prep work for the Kairos mission, and I was going to be here for maybe 10 days and go home and file a report. And now I'm going to live here, and I'm thinking that I should probably feel more destabilized by that than I do. And you don't. I feel anchored somehow, I said. Which doesn't make a lot of sense given that everything familiar is about to be very far away. She was quiet for a moment. The Vethka *, she said. The memory stone, it anchors us, not because it holds the past but because it demonstrates that presence leaves a mark, that the fact of being somewhere genuinely, it changes the structure of things around you. She paused. You have been genuinely present here. I could feel it. I looked at her. The amber light caught the iridescence in her skin, the flicker of violet and silver that I had learned to notice, that I now knew was more visible when she was relaxed. She was relaxed now. Here in the garden at the end of the day, with the ceremony behind us, she was a person and not an office, and the difference was visible in her face. Can I tell you something? I said. Yes. The thing I said, the accident, I said. I've thought about it a lot, about whether the fact that it was a mistake matters in terms of everything that followed. And what did you decide? She said. The mistake was the words, I said, but the document section on lying on performance as a form of deception, I've tried to apply that to myself too. And when I look at the last 30 days honestly, the mistake was the bead and the rest was real. Every piece of it. So I think the accident got me in the room, and what happened in the room was genuine. She looked at me. That, she said, is an honest answer. I've been practicing, I said. The corner of her mouth moved again. This time it went further, not quite a full smile by human standards, but enough. Enough to be real, enough to be hers, enough to be something I would be able to see, standing beside her under 800 years of her predecessors, for whatever came next. Yes, she said, I noticed. The amber light shifted toward the deep violet of the station's artificial night. The flowers, still unnamed, still the colors I had no words for, closed gradually, folding in on themselves with the patient certainty of things that know they will open again. I sat beside the Queen of Velshara in a garden full of things I didn't have names for yet. I thought I have time. I thought I'll learn them. And